Book 49 of 2020 was War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Yes, I did read War and Peace, before you ask. I listened to 61 hours of audio on Audible Stories, so there's a free audio book. Go and listen. I can officially say that I have joined the War and Peace Club. Obviously this is a classic, it's been translated, so my version of it might be, you know, slightly different to versions that other people have read, and similarly because it's an audio book, that might be different as well. I did notice when I was listening to it that there was a few kind of phrases that were a little bit modern for the time that it was written, so I was like, that's a little bit of a translation thing. But if you kind of think that, I had a bit of mind blank then. I was kind of like, what am I trying to say? I haven't actually wrote a review for this book, so I'm ad hocing. So you can see now how useless I am at these without actually having written it first. But basically, the way that I was listening to it was good, but it might not actually be Leo Tolstoy's actual intention. So that's what I was trying to get at. What Leo Tolstoy is really, really good at, and I find this fascinating because he basically is very, very good at the psychology of the characters. You know, if you want to read or see an example of really, really good characterization, read something by Leo Tolstoy. I imagine that his other books will be quite similar, but the characters, they say things, but then you also find out what's going on in their head. And it's not just one character that you find out about, you find out about all the characters. So you understand what's going on the surface, you understand what's going on underneath, and you've got a real kind of understanding of those characters and why they are the way that they are, and what's affecting them to a point. Obviously, it's not a character-driven book, it's a book that's driven by plot as well, so there is a balance between the two, but the characterization is very good because it changes those perspectives and because you see outside as well as inside, and you can read between the lines to kind of construct that a little bit more. So very, very good in that sense. And what is fascinating about it, to go back to what I was just saying before, but I got muddled up, which is why I said it in that order, is that human nature doesn't really change, because Leo Tolstoy wrote this book in, I think, the 1800s, a long time ago, and the characters are exactly how the characters would be today. The way that they behave and the way that they kind of say things and the way that they get embarrassed and the way that they are a little bit, you know, it's just like how you would behave. I was listening to it thinking, yeah, I'd probably do that, and yeah, I'd probably respond like that. And so it was just like as if humans are still the same now as they were back then. Like, you'd think culture and being modern would, you know, being modernised would affect how a person is, but clearly not, because the way that people are behaving is pretty much similar to how they were back then. I always think that what's really good about a classic is that it gives you an insight into the mind of people at that time. So either the mind of the author or the mind of the people that were at that time that the author's commented on. So it gives you kind of an insight into that kind of world. And so even if, you know, because classics come on, they're boring usually because they're out of date, and you have to read them in context, so you have to understand what they were like at that time. And I think if you can appreciate that, then you won't mind reading it. So for example, for me, I gave this book 2 stars, which means that it was okay, because 3 stars means I enjoyed it. Now, I didn't enjoy this book, but I appreciate this book. So I would actually say don't judge it based on my star rating, because it is a good book and it is worth reading, but you've got to understand it in context of when it was written. And so I'd just caveat that before I kind of carry on. What I really liked about this was that it was a good juxtaposition between wartime and peacetime. And it touches on that kind of idea of war, that war is continuous and that peacetime is only a temporary absence of war. So it kind of does that nicely, because this war continues throughout the entire book. And obviously the book's massive, takes ages to listen to. And it's not that there is peacetime in it, it's just that you've got the war, which is like where the men are, and then they kind of come back, and peace is like where society is and where the family is. And there's that kind of, you know, comparison between the two. What Tolstoy does really well, which is something that you need to know the context of, is that he doesn't glorify war, which is something that was done in his time. Like there was lots of art and lots of literature and things like that, which glorified war and made it seem like it was this great thing and, you know, to take part in. But what Tolstoy does really well is he presents the reality of war. He presents like people getting their limbs blown off, and he presents, you know, the I don't say the what's that word? Like the crapness of war, basically, where, you know, your feet are frostbitten, falling off, and, you know, you've not eaten properly, and there's like men behaving not very well, not very refined. So he does that really well, because that's something that most, like, obviously when the world wars happened, the viewpoint of war changed because of a lot of poetry, like from Wilfred Owen and things like that. But prior to that time, there was, you know, Leo Tolstoy is actually kind of, I guess, revolutionary for his time in that sense. But obviously, my understanding of history of that time is not spot on, so I could be wrong about that. But I know obviously he's writing from a Russian perspective as well, which is probably why there's a different influence. And then there's that comparison with society. So upper class society, where it's all the kind of pomp of society, and it's almost like mocking it, because, you know, you've got war going on, which is horrendous, and then the people come back, and it's almost like they can't really take part in the society that they did before they went away. And that kind of mirrors what it's like for people that go away to war, because they can never really kind of come back into society, because they're always kind of thinking about what life was like during wartime and what's going on in other parts of the world that the people in society aren't actually aware of. So that was kind of nice. And it kind of mocks as well, like that, you know, the women are staying at home and all they're kind of caring about is who's going to marry who and who's going to inherit what, and yet there's kind of this war going on. But this war as well is like to no aim. It's like it's not really making much of a difference. It's kind of, you know, it's just warring for war's sake, and it's affecting lots of people's lives. You know, people are dying and things like that, and it just seems all a bit futile. I've wrote something on my board and I can't read it. It says like re-comment. I don't even know what I was actually meaning by that. But this book's really good in the sense that it's touched on politics, it's touched on kind of society, and these things are kind of mirrors to what's kind of going on today. So you can kind of draw comparisons between the two, which allow you to have that better understanding of human nature and of how society might progress or how it might regress. And so it kind of gives you that insight that you wouldn't necessarily have if you didn't read this book. So I would definitely recommend it to read. I think for me personally, I'm not great at listening to lots of stuff about war and battles, because it all just rolls into one for me. I kind of, you know, it just, whatever, it's war, it's all the same thing, isn't it? And so for that reason, I found myself kind of switching off a little bit when they were in the war kind of sections, and it's obviously a lot of the book. You might find it more interesting than me, but that kind of reduced my enjoyment of it because there's a lot of the war stuff. I prefer the bits where they're in society, because there's a lot of kind of humorous characters. Leo Tolstoy is really good at humour and satire, and you just laugh at some of the things because they're just so ridiculous. So he does that really, really well. So he's a very, very skilled writer, you know, challenging the status quo, love a revolutionary. And so I would definitely recommend it to read or to listen to. But I don't think that you're going to think that it's amazing and rave about it and really enjoy it. But I think you will get a lot out of it if you were to read it.